Hey, how's it going, Victor? We are going to be starting in just a few minutes. I'm giving it a moment for people to hop in if they want to. Hello. Yeah, I don't think that name is too bad, but you know, just in case I'll avoid it. But welcome to the stream. We're going to be starting in just a few moments. Okay, so here's the plan for today. I have been meaning to get back to doing these streams, and we were going to be looking at NixOS next. In the previous streams, we covered the Nix language, we talked about what flakes are, we even took a brief look at the NixOS module system, which is a part of Nix packages, that package library. But now we're going to actually look at installing NixOS on a real system. So I have another computer in the other room that is, let me just turn that off real quick. I have another computer in another room that I have OpenSSH running on the installer. For you, you're probably going to want to install NixOS like on the system that you're currently working with, right? You have a keyboard attached and display, but I'm just going to be SSH'd into it. It'll work the exact same way. Just know that you can do this at the physical machine itself. So the first things first are going to be mostly the same as installing any other Linux distribution, which means we have a couple things to take care of. We have the partitioning of the disk, so we need to make sure that it's set up to actually house all of our data and house the OS. And after that, we're going to set up some like mount points for that disk so that we can install to it. And once that's done, we can run the NixOS installer. Okay, and if that sounds like it's too few steps, it's actually that easy. Installing NixOS is pretty plain. The interesting part is going to be that last bit of running the installer, because we'll have to give it a configuration to use. and so we'll need to make sure that we get that all correct. But for these purposes, it won't be too bad. The system that we're installing on is all like wired networking. It doesn't use any like graphic stuff. I don't have to worry about setting up any specific things. So the configuration we're going to be able to write is going to be quite small. So let's go ahead and get started then. I'm going to be using ZFS for this this machine. I've been pretty happy with ZFS in the past, and so we're going to continue using it here. Just know that you can use any other file system you want, but the steps you'll take at this first part of partitioning the disk will be slightly different. Anytime that I'm doing a ZFS specific thing, so running a ZFS command or zpool command, you're going to instead have to refer over to the NixOS manual. But thankfully, that guide is also pretty good and pretty step-by-step helpful of telling you, run these commands, and you'll be all set. So first what we're going to do is go ahead and look at what block devices we have. So ls block, we can go ahead and see, here is my USB that's currently plugged in and running the installer, and the rest of the stuff here, this SDA, is the actual disk in the machine. So we're going to go ahead and install on there. You can see it's actually already been partitioned from last time when I installed something on here, but we're going to go ahead and redo this so that we can, do it live here. All right, first things first, let's sudo sgdisk zap all and /dev SDA. And so this is just going to nuke any existing partition table and say, bye-bye, we don't need that anymore. So we run ls block, and now all of a sudden it is gone, right? We don't have any of those partitions because we got rid of that partition table. So next step is to create our actual partitions, our file system, however we're going to do this. And specifically what we're going to do is actually set up two unique parts. We're going to set up a boot partition and a data partition for where we're going to install ZFS to. You might do this differently. This probably isn't the most ideal way to do it with ZFS either. You can set up some other ways of installing your boot partition, but this is how I've kind of migrated from things in the past, and so it's sort of worked. So what we'll do is actually just run cfdisk, I believe, and say dev SDA. Contains a member signature. It will be removed by write command. Cool. So it's saying that there were some things installed here. And I like using cfdisk because we get this interface. It's a little more friendly to work with than some of the raw command line stuff. So first we're going to create our partition table. We'll say GPT. Then we get to go ahead and set up the different parts of our disk. Okay, so I mentioned we need two parts, or three if we want swap, if you're not going to use a swap file. And I figure I'll show how to do that so that we just get all those done. But first is going to be our boot partition. Okay, so our boot partition, we're going to, hold on, we'll hit new here, so I'll press enter. Partition size. The boot partition can be pretty small, though NixOS will chuck a bunch of stuff onto it for each generation. So the more generations of your system you want to be able to save and flip between, the bigger this partition is going to need to be. So let me just go ahead and give it like 1 GB. I think it's just 1 G. Okay, so we have 1 GB, 1 gigabyte partition here for boot. I'm going to change the type to, it should be in here, EFI, and if it's not, we can do this manually. Oh, EFI, there we go. Because this is our boot partition, so it needs to be set up to be operating as that boot space, and so there's a specific type that we can set. Then we're going to go ahead and set up, we could just do our data partition, but I mentioned swap is also something you might want to use. I'm kind of targeting sort of everybody with this guide, so I'll mention swap. The idea is sometimes you can't hold everything in your RAM, and sometimes you need extra RAM, and a swap area on your disk acts as just storage that your OS can use and say, oh, we ran out of RAM, I'm just going to use this little space on the disk. So think of it as like a fallback. It's much slower than RAM, but it can be useful to have. Now you can create a partition like I'm going to do here, or you can actually use a file on your data partition instead. And there's some cool things you can do around that, so you don't have to manage it separately on the disk, and you can maybe even dynamically grow and shrink it. But we'll go ahead and do this here. So this machine, if I remember correctly, has 32 gigs of RAM. So I'm going to go ahead and make this a 16 gig swap. And that's often the recommendation is like half of your RAM size. Most of that is coming from like suspending to disk and things, but it's a good sort of estimate, like about half your RAM in swap space. Okay, we're going to change the type here, and we're going to look for Linux swap. There it is. And then finally, we're going to create another partition here, and that's going to be the rest of our disk. So we'll just use everything else and say, yep, whatever the size is there, go for it. Okay. Now, we're double checking that we got everything right. So the first one is boot, then we have swap, then we have all of our data. And it looks like the sizes on that are correct, and the types are all correct as well, right? We have EFI at 1 GB, we have Linux swap at 16, and then everything else is just some arbitrary file system. Cool. So I'm going to go ahead and select right down at the bottom here, and it's going to ask, are you sure? And we have to type yes, all the letters, and hit enter. Okay, now we are done. So we can go ahead and quit out of here. And if I run lsblk again, now we see, ooh, it looks like before when I had shown you my previous installation, we're seeing a similar setup. The boot partition on this one is much smaller than the previous, but like I mentioned, it depends on the amount of stuff that you want to actually keep in there. And you can, try this out and always come back and reinstall, repartition, and do different stuff later. And you can go through these same steps and then take your existing NixOS configuration, drop it right on here, and get back to where you were. Speaking of, let's make our way towards that by now actually setting up the file system. So in order to do that, we're going to have to run zpool command in order to actually create a brand new pool for our ZFS file system. And so I have a big long command here that I just copy paste. And basically what this is going to do is it's going to make us a brand new pool. So ZFS does this cool thing of letting you take multiple drives and treat them as like one big thing. And then you can create smaller chunks of that as data sets that you can manage individually. So it makes it a lot easier to work with lots of drives, and that's why I use this for my NAS, for example. So I can store a bunch of things between 5 different drives and have redundancy and some cool stuff like that. So we're going to go ahead and do this. I believe that RAID Z1 won't work here. I don't remember what the version is for a single disk installation. I'm planning to eventually add another, but for now we'll run it like this. And so what we're saying here is go ahead and create me a new pool of these drives, and NixOS can mount these ZFS things. However, it might have a little bit of trouble, or that might have been resolved by now, but I've found, at least in my configuration, the easiest way to manage this stuff is by setting no mount point here so that NixOS can mount it like the older file systems it's used to. Then some other things for setting like compression and some improvements in like performance and around that. So here we go. We're just going to set up the zpool and then importantly mount it to /mount. This is going to look a lot like if you were to do the same kind of setup for an ext4 file system. You would then mount this to /mnt. Invalid VDEV specification contains a FAT file system. SDA 3. Whoopsies. There we go. Okay, cool. So now we should have a /mount, and we do. and lsblk, and we'll see that is all still looking the same. So we didn't break anything, good. Not that it will. Okay, so now that we have created our Z pool, and I believe we can even say Z pool list, and we'll see it right here. What we're going to do is create some data sets. And you can think of those as like paths in your file system, but they're like chunked up blocks that ZFS can manage individually, so you can do things like snapshots, which is really cool. So here I'm just going to go ahead and make a couple. So we'll say ZFS create, and I want mount point legacy. Here's that thing I was talking about with letting NixOS mount it the old way. We're not mounting the pool normally, we're mounting the individual data sets like old stuff. And so what we're going to do is say it's on that pool, and I'm going to call this local/root, okay? I'm going to make another one, local/nix. We'll also do safe/home and safe/persist. I'm setting all of these up with the anticipation of eventually adopting impermanent stuff. I don't currently do that right now, but I've gotten in the habit of just laying things out like this so that in the future I can make these last two parts my home directory and explicitly any files I want to keep at a particular location on my disk, the only things that persist. And so being able to kind of keep the system clean. But that's up to you. You don't have to do that. You could just go ahead and make like just this root and just Nix if you wanted to. You're more than welcome to simplify that. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and make the boot and swap partitions. Or rather, we're going to use those. So really quick, just in case, I'm just going to say run this command to create our boot partition. It should be SDA1. How's it going, Dustin? Yeah, I would imagine. But thanks for popping in. Okay. It gives us a warning about lowercase labels not working because Windows is evil, but we're using Linux, so who cares? Now we're going to go ahead and say sudo make swap. We'll label it swap dev sda2. Cool. And these are all just from our lsblk here that we set up the different partitions. So our boot partition, just made sure that it is FAT32 and I labeled it boot, and then swap SDA2, and then finally now we'll say swap on dev SDA2, so that we get a little extra memory during this install, or at least make it so we don't run out of memory during this install. Okay, cool. Now we start the mounting process. We have all of those data sets that we created for our disk. Now we want to make sure that they're all put in the right place. So we'll mount, and we'll mount a ZFS target that is going to be rpool local root. And that's just going to be directly on /mount. So that'll be the root of everything, which is why we called it root. Okay, we're going to do the same thing for, oh, I lied. We're not going to do that yet. We are going to make a directory for our boot stuff. Remember, that's on a separate partition. So we need to mount it here. We'll say by ID, and this is why I labeled it, so that we can easily refer to it with our by ID stuff. And mounts boot. Oop, specifies does not exist. Oop, did I want by label? There we go. Okay. So we should see now that our boot is mounted to /mount/boot. Our swap is currently acting as swap space. And SDA3 doesn't show that it's mounted, but ZFS is actually doing stuff with it. Okay. So now we can make the Nix directory, and this is why I made a separate data set for Nix so that we can manage it individually. So you can actually limit maybe the size or restrict it to certain things that it can and can't do. local/nix and mount/nix, because that'll end up at the /nix of our system that we're going to be using. And so everything, including the Nix store, will be in there. Okay, we're just going to make our home directory now. And we'll go ahead and mount our data set for that. We called it save/home, and that's going to mount to mount/home. And we'll do the same exact thing for this magic persist data set as well. Now again, I'm setting things up because I would like to move over to using some impermanent stuff in the future, but you don't have to make this as complicated. Like I said, you could just do these first few things of the root and maybe adding a Nix dataset, but you don't even have to do that. You could keep it as simple as just, okay, I'm going to set up my root, I'll add a boot partition and some swap. And that works as well. Or you could use a different file system like ext4, and the NixOS guide is pretty great at walking you through that. Okay, the last thing that I want to do is make sure that I enable auto snapshotting, because I like to take snapshots of my ZFS pools. Oh, wait, there's an error here that I didn't see. Cannot be mounted to /persist due to canonicalization. We'll make that direct. Oop, sudo. There we go. And now we can mount that. Okay. As I was saying, I want to make sure that I enable auto snapshotting on this data set, because I would like to take snapshots of my data. Cool. The next thing to do is that third step. So we just did partitioning. We just did like setting up the what did I say the different parts were? Yeah, we have partitioning, we have setting up the data sets. Okay, yeah, I forgot what I said already. That's fine. The next step here is running the NixOS installer stuff. But of course, in order to do that, we need a configuration file, right? And I don't have a configuration file yet. So let's do this. Let's tell NixOS to help us generate a config for this system. So sudo nixos generate config, and by default, it's actually going to be smart enough to know you probably want this in /mount, but you can even specify where you want it. I'm going to tell it to put it in /mount. You don't have to add that. It'll do it on its own, I believe. Okay, cool. So it wrote two separate files. So let's go ahead and take a look at those. So I'm going to cd to /mount. And cd. So now etc NixOS, and I'll open my editor here so you can see what we have going on. All right, so it made two separate files. The first one is our configuration.nix, which is the entry point for your NixOS system. This is where your configuration starts. And it added some basic stuff here of, oh, you probably want to boot and you probably want to add some things. There's a lot of helpful suggestions in here of, hey, you can create your user like this. You can install any packages you want. You can set up your firewall and a bunch of cool things. I recommend taking a look at some of these because they'll be very helpful, as well as something like this option, which if it's your first time installing, it's nice to have a little backup effectively of your configuration. However, we're going to look at something that's more interesting for us, which is this hardware configuration.nix. So the hardware configuration was also generated, and we could have written both of these ourselves, but the reason that NixOS generate config exists is because this would be quite tedious to figure out. So remember, NixOS requires you to specify everything about your system the way that you want it in your config. And that includes things like what kernel modules are available. It includes things like your file systems or your swap devices or your networking, etc. So a whole bunch of things need to be specified based on your hardware. And that can be quite tedious, and you might get some things wrong. Like might not have thought to add KVM Intel, for example, and later down the road, I would have run into an issue if I were trying to do some virtual machine stuff. That would stink. So instead, you can use NixOS generate config to help you kickstart things by getting this hardware configuration created. And it will look at your current system and add a bunch of the things that you need. Like, for example, I have a Wi-Fi card in here, and I wasn't actually planning on setting it up using the Wi-Fi because I have it plugged in with an Ethernet cable. But NixOS generate config saw, hey, that's a Broadcom card. It needs a special package to actually work. And this is an issue I had run into previously at like a year and a half ago with NixOS on this specific machine of having to add this package, and it was a large pain. And look how easy it is with NixOS generate config, saying just figure out what I need to make this hardware work, and it sets up all the boilerplate, which is fantastic. This says do not modify this file. It was generated by NixOS generate config. You can heed this advice if you want. I don't see an issue with modifying this once you understand that like this is a part of your configuration and you're taking ownership of it, and any changes you make here are going to be changes to your system config. And so that can be very useful as a way to say, oh, you know, this option is really about hardware. I want to put it in here because it makes more sense. But you can also treat this as like an artifact that NixOS generate config created for you, and not modify it if you don't want to. And then you can put your config in other files. It's mostly preference, but I personally don't see an issue with modifying it. Okay, so now we get to update our configuration. So let's start. We'll try and get this configuration going here. We'll see if I can set it up the way that I want it without breaking things, because I'd like to do a base install and work our way up to what I have in my setup. So first things first, we want our boot stuff to work. So it's set up systemd boot by default. You can switch this to grub, but it's mostly preference. Systemd boot works fairly well. The only thing you're missing out on is theming, which, you know, it's personal preference. The host name that you want, you can choose your host name here, or we're going to look at how we can modify that using flakes in a little bit. I'm going to set it for, let me sudo nvim so I can edit some things. Ooh. Let me go ahead and set this here so that we get our host name. So I'll name it Ruby. All of my machines are named after different gemstones, just because it's fun to have a theme. Okay. Time zone, we can set the time zone. I believe it is America, Los Angeles. I always forget, but I think that's right. And then let's see. Networking, we don't want any proxy stuff. We don't really care about anything else. I don't want any graphic stuff on this machine, but here's where you would consider doing that. If you wanted to set up a desktop environment, you can do that. Let's see, I don't need sound for this machine. It's going to operate as a server, so totally headless. I am going to create a user, however. So we'll say users.users.short is normal user. We'll make sure that I'm in sudo, and we can even add some packages. So I'm going to add NeoVim, for example, because I like using NeoVim. We don't need tree, we don't need Firefox. Make sure that Git is there, although I believe it is, it may be by default. If it's not, you can have Nix grab it for you. Let's see, what else do we want? I think that might even be it for that. Okay, so now system packages. Oh, actually, we'll put these in system packages. We don't need user specific packages. At least my systems tend to be single user, and I don't mind just having everything installed system wide. So that would be why. Okay, we don't need wget. Vim, I guess. We got NeoVim, which is the one we're going to be using, we're going to turn on OpenSSH here so that we can get access to this machine. This might be useful for you, but if you're installing this on your desktop, then you probably won't care about this option. However, if you're wanting to do something like I am, installing this on another machine that you intend to like connect remotely to or run services on, having OpenSSH set up is very useful. And the way that we're going to do this is turning on OpenSSH, then in the user configuration, we can set some cool stuff. Let me show you. This is my config. I'm just going to grab here this key, and what we're going to do is set, where is it? OpenSSH.authorized keys. Okay, so OpenSSH.authorized keys, and that's a list of the public SSH keys that you want to be able to access this user, which is super cool. And so with just these two lines, so this line here and then this line here, we create the SSH server and give our user access with that SSH key. Pretty neat. Okay, cool. So I think that might even be enough for us to start this server, because we boot and we have our user and we have SSH access. So that might just be the bare minimum. I am going to do one more thing, which is configure Nix to support flakes, because I do like using my flakes. So we're going to set a couple things here. Actually, I may take a few things here. So we'll say Nix specify our settings here for Nix, and this just gets added to our nix.conf file, which I can show you right here. So this nix.conf file is configuration for Nix itself. And so you can set a bunch of these things in your NixOS configuration. And that configuration gets, well, used by Nix. So different things that you want. These are the settings that I like. Being able to use flakes is the most important one for me, but then also a relaxed sandbox, so I can do some like opt-in things for certain packages. There's some stuff that you can't do by default in Nix packages, like access the network. But certain packages can mark themselves and say, hey, I need that functionality. And if you set your sandbox to either relaxed or off, you can opt in to those specific packages not using the sandbox while still having everything else be sandboxed. And so you get just like certain packages with added functionality, which lets you do some cool things, like render VHS tapes, for example. Anyway, we're also going to give our user access to the Nix daemon stuff. By default, I believe it's just root that can do it, but we're going to make it so it's nice and easy to work with. So to do that, we'll say root as well as my user. Okay, and that's the same thing that I have in my config, but it's just a little more complicated. You don't really need to worry about that. Okay, cool. So we've configured, actually not that much. We set a host name, we set our time zone, we configured our user, added an SSH key, set up, a couple Nix options to make it easier to work with in the future, and a couple system packages, then enabled OpenSSH. That's all that we actually did here, and we're just going to, from there, install NixOS. And hopefully it works, fingers crossed. So now that we've edited things, we'll say sudo NixOS install. Oh, let me just get out of here real quick. Sudo NixOS install. Not that I needed to, but just in case. All right, and that's going to run the whole install process. And this knows to look at our /mount directory, but we could have mounted this somewhere else and specified it with a parameter, just like we did NixOS generate config. Now, this part might take a little bit, but that's normal. So it's going to do the whole process of pulling down Nix packages, setting up the build for our system. So it's going to build that configuration that we made and copy everything into there. Oh, I did forget one thing. ZFS is a special little snowflake and needs networking.hostid set. So I even have a note about this in my stuff. For example, here we are, this networking stuff. So sudo nvim, we'll just jump right back to that NixOS configuration.nix. And in here, I just want to make sure that I don't, oh, I do have networking stuff up here. Okay. So we'll just say networking, we'll put these together in here, why not? And we're going to get this bit of information here. So we'll say in here, I don't remember exactly the way to do it. I think it's this, head C8 etc machine ID. There we go. And so we're just reading this file that systemd generates, and it's a unique ID for the system. And this is what we're going to use to hand off to ZFS because it needs a unique ID. So we're just going to use this. Okay, and now we can run NixOS install. There we go, and it's building our configuration. So it'll grab all the packages we need, and oh, of course, Broadcom STA is not free. It's funny, you run into so many things that I've already solved in my configuration. So the way that we're going to solve this is probably using, let's see, I do wonder. Maybe we'll go this route. We'll just allow that one package. So there's a couple different ways that you could resolve this. You could set an environment variable, but then you're going to have to make sure that you build impurely, which stinks. You could set an option in your config, but or actually you could set an option in your config, but that would be for every package. Or you could even specify just the packages that you don't want, or that you do want to allow that are not free. Or you can set it in your Nix config itself, such as your home config, or that /etc nix.conf that we looked at, and just say allow any unfree stuff. Let's do the fun one of allowing just this one package. Okay, so I'm just going to put that configuration right in here, and we'll delete that extra curly brace, because the example it gave us was for your configuration, which starts here. It's your object of config. And so we'll just specify our Nix packages configuration in here to allow just this one package. All right, let's try again. Oh, undefined variable lib. Whoa, what's that? Well, lib here, gosh, maybe the example needs to be updated. Lib is another thing that comes, I think, through these options, or at least my config passes it. But if not, that is the Nix packages library that we looked at in a previous video, which is on this packages set. So we could say packages.lib, but I wonder if it'll come through here. Let's go ahead and try this, because that might be one of those, and it is one of those arguments that gets passed to your configuration or any module when you're building an NixOS system. Cool. There we go. And so you can see it's copying all of those files over into the Nix store for this machine. So it'll grab all those different packages. It'll build our system closure. It'll build our actual, like, the whole system using a Nix build, and that will be the result on our /mount, which is super duper cool. So it'll set up the bootloader and everything too. Just let it go. It's going to take a little bit, so we'll hang out for a moment. If anybody has questions in chat, I'm happy to answer. Now is probably a great time to ask, because we'll be waiting for this next build. Exciting, always exciting. So once this is installed, we're going to look at rebooting the system. Hopefully it'll come up and we can SSH in. Then from there, we're going to transition our configuration from this older style configuration.nix to using a flake and kind of what that means. We looked at flakes in a previous video, so some of the concepts of like dependencies, being able to pull in a specific version of Nix packages, that is, we're not going to recover that, but it'll be useful in the past, from the past video. And we get to make a password for our root user. Sweet. How do you deal with non-declarative configurations? I refer to Emacs, for example. Constantly tweaking it so read-only store links are not an option. Well, it depends. So there's a couple of different ways that you can handle things that change frequently, which I think is the specific thing here. Because you could go out of your way to try and like package things with Nix, and in fact I have for my NeoVim configuration. I built all that with Nix, and I can show that off in a future stream. But another option you have is to actually kind of not worry about that. So what you could do is actually just put your configuration in your home directory, point there, and have system packages available in like the global scope. It's not as clean as you might like it, but that's something you could do, is kind of treat it like it's any other system where you would just install a package and then have your configuration in your home directory. I think flakes are a neat feature, but I found it hard to find good resources aimed at new users of NixOS. What are your thoughts on Flatpak? So Nix flakes are super duper awesome. We're going to look at turning this into a flake in just a moment, and I can mention where would be good places to look for that. But you're totally right that its documentation is a little hard to get through as a newcomer. For Flatpak, I think it's doing a lot of very useful things. And definitely some problems that it solves, Nix solves, or some problems that Nix solves, Flatpak solves. But I think that Nix solves more. I think that Nix solves these problems in a more reliable way and in a more useful way. But some things about Flatpak that Nix doesn't have, like permissions, for example, and that like kind of containerization and namespacing is very useful. I hope you show off your Nix NeoVim config. I tried to Nixify my NeoVim and I ended up giving up and just simulating my configs through Home Manager. See, that's one option, and that's not too bad. You can always go that route of just putting things in your home directory and saying, you know what, I'll do it like the old way for now, and I'll figure it out later. Yeah, we'll take a look at my NeoVim stuff in a future stream then maybe. I tested your NeoVim configuration, great job. Still surprised how I can just use your whole editor environment with ease without polluting any of mine. Yeah, it's fantastic. Once you have something packaged with Nix, it's really easy to use. The hard part is totally just packaging it. Okay, so here we go. We are all installed. Everything is here. We should be good. We got a bunch of warnings printed out, but I think that's just normal output of like, uh-oh, I couldn't find a thing. We don't need it. So let's try this. I am going to reboot the system, and I'm going to run over and unplug the USB so that we don't boot off of it again, because I have the BIOS set to make that easier. So we'll say sudo, actually I'll say shutdown, and I'll run over there, unplug the USB, and I'll turn the system back on. We should see it come back up with our OS that we installed. Okay, so we shut her down. Oh, now, there we go. Cool. So system should be powering off, and I'm going to run over and unplug that. Oh, Dustin said, I fall back to Flatpaks only if something in Nix packages misses on my use case. Yeah, that's I don't even do that. I think I'm a little stubborn. I don't like having multiple things managing packages, but that's definitely one great option as a fallback to get some of the benefits of lockdown dependencies. But yeah, hopefully there's more things that are useful. Yeah, big it depends. Okay, I will be right back. Okay, so it is powering back on. So we should be able to SSH to it, although I am going to get an error about the SSH key being wrong. So let's just fix that up. And we can try, hopefully it comes up with the same IP. It should. It could. It might. I don't know. Is it booted? No? Let me go ahead and check and see if it is on that same IP. Let's see here, 133? No? That's not it? Let me run over to the machine and double check to make sure that it is actually booting. Okay, so this is not what I expected. Um, it looks like my system isn't not just not booting, it's not even getting to the BIOS. So something weird is happening. I'm going to try connecting it to a different display. I just brought out a temporary one with a VGA cable. It's an older machine. So I'm going to try using DisplayPort and see if I connect to that, because it should still be booting. I didn't do anything weird. Um, but yeah, it seems like there's some shenanigans afoot. What's everybody in chat saying? My current NixOS config doesn't utilize flakes, but I hope to migrate it to it once I get a better grasp on them. Yeah, flakes solve some extra problems that base NixOS doesn't. Channels in NixOS aren't great. Flakes kind of solve that problem of locking down the version that you're using of Nix packages and also being able to easily add and use other packages from different versions. It's very useful. I think Flakes is the entry point to the config/package. You just explicitly define the inputs and outputs. Yeah, exactly. It acts as just the entry point. In fact, we'll transition to Flakes, and it'll be using our existing configuration.nix stuff. We're just going to be treating the Flake as now the entry point. Just curious, how much have others been breaking out into individual files versus a mono file? For example, I'm sitting at 82 directories, 184 files. It depends. like, um, so it really, really, really depends on how you want to organize things. I think fundamentally, having everything in a single file doesn't scale, right? You're going to want to have more config than will reasonably fit and let you kind of think about what's in there. Let's see. By just modules. Um, uh, 44 files. Okay, not too bad. But I think that breaking them out into different files makes sense, and the way that you do that is really going to be up to you. I like to break things out by these different modules in kind of domains of like I'll have a networking thing, I'll have a tail scale thing, I'll have a thing for installing this package. I just think about how easy I would want to find the code later and what I would search for. Yeah, exactly. That's the big thing, is having it in a single file makes it quite difficult to, one, know where to look for a thing. I mean, I guess you know it's in the file, but good luck. And then being able to modify it later without really worrying, and being able to break things apart into these smaller modules simplifies a lot of those. You can know that like, oh, if I'm going to be dealing with Git stuff, I go to my Git module and I edit stuff there. So anyway, I am going to try using a different display, see if I can get some video output on this gosh darn thing. But I'm having an adventure over here. I'll be back, chat. I'll be back. Wow, I absolutely was muted. Gosh, and I thought too, like, I'll mute myself. I'll come back. I'll remember to unmute. Okay, so yes, I was just talking to myself, saying that I think there's something a little funny going on. I think the VGA cable that I grabbed is bad, but also um, there seems to be an issue with the system booting. Yeah, welcome back, right? So I was taking a look here, trying to figure out what is going on, and I just started copying or like referencing my existing configuration to see if I did anything wrong here, but I don't think I did. It's possible that I borked it a little bit by not exporting the Z pool and unmounting stuff at the end. So I figured we'd come back in, I can try installing again, and hopefully that would work. So that's where we're at, is I was just taking another look at the configuration and making sure that things seemed right. I mean, they seem right, so I don't know what would be the issue here. At least nothing is jumping out at me saying this is super duper duper wrong. So that configuration looks pretty good. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run another NixOS install. And this will be fine. It'll overwrite the existing stuff if necessary. The same way that NixOS rebuild effectively would like plop new stuff onto your system. This is going to do the same thing. So there's nothing necessarily destructive. In fact, I've run NixOS install on the desktop that I'm streaming from right now multiple times because I've been playing around with some things and got the Nix store in a bad state and couldn't recover. And wouldn't you know it, the answer is actually just boot into the installer, run NixOS install with my config, and there you go. I just went back to when it prompted for password. See, here we go. There we are. Okay, cool. So now we should be good to move on from here. So the next step, I should have put this in my notes. We're going to unmount everything. Unmount recursively. Okay. Sudo zpool list, zpool export. Oh, did it give some serious errors? Things look... I mentioned before that there were some errors, but I didn't see anything particularly, like, horrible. At least I didn't think so. Like, if there was something that was going to explode, I didn't think that would be the case, although I could be super duper wrong. I haven't installed this way in a little bit, truth be told. But let's try this. So we're going to export that zpool. So now nothing is mounted there. Yeah, there was a file not found for a module, and I think it should handle that fine. But we'll see here. So I've unmounted stuff. Now we should be able to reboot. So I'll say sudo shutdown. I'll go unplug the USB so the installer doesn't boot, and instead we should boot into the OS this time. All right, everybody cross your fingers. I'll be right back. All right, I'm going to take a look at, it seems like there might be an error being printed out, so give me one moment. But one of you didn't cross your fingers. I know one of you's out there who's not with me on this. Okay, so I should now have a photo of the error which flashes briefly on the screen as it's trying to boot stage 1. Aborting. ACPI BIOS error, could not resolve symbol. Delightful. Starting device mapper and LVM, importing ZFS root, ZFS pool rpool. Did I maybe perchance screw that up? I don't think I did. Let's, Let's check what create. What am I doing wrong? That command looks fine. Well, let me try this. I'm gonna boot the installer back up, and we'll try installing using my Flake. And if that succeeds, then we know the problem is with configuration. If it doesn't, there's something screwy about this machine. So I will be once again right back. Okay. I did notice that I'm getting the same quote-unquote error message printed out during stage 1 in the installer, but it boots fine. I think the problem is it's getting stuck in the Z pool. So I may actually just redo that to make sure that I get it right. Oh, I'm on a different machine. There we are, and it's different. You love to see it. Yes. Okay, so we're gonna jump back on here, and I'm just gonna really quickly run through the stuff that we did before, pretty much. I'm not going to re-partition, but I am going to reformat. So here we go. Oh, right, not repartitioning. I just said that, and I'm like, okay, here we go. Time to repartition. Let's see. I think there is a zpool delete. I don't remember what the name is of it. Destroy. There we go. Destroy rpool. Sudo zpool import rpool. Okay, and now we destroy it. All right, sudo zfs list. Cool. Let's just write back over everything. So we'll reformat boot. It's DA1. Yep. let's make swap on SDA2. We'll swap on SDA2. And if all this works, all it means is that I went a little too fast and or got distracted while I was trying to explain what I was doing. Okay. Oh, I need to make all those data sets again. In fact, I need to make the pool. I'm going to zpool create here. I'm going to just double check to see what options I can put. Because there is RAID Z1. No. RAID Z. The command also checks that the replication strategy for the pool is consistent and attempts to combine redundant and non-redundant storage. Yep, okay. The pool names mirror, draid, spare, and log are reserved, as are names beginning with mirror, raid Z, and spare. The VDIV section specification is described in that. Great, you'll love to see it. Let's see. It might be that I actually just got this command wrong. Perhaps what I actually want is SDA3 and RAID Z 0, because there's only one disk. RAID Z1. Yep, okay, it requires at least 2 devices. Mirror. Yep, requires at least 2 devices. Okay, I think this should be fine then. Don't know that I took great notes on just single drive zpool installation, which is, I don't think, particularly common, but that should have worked. SDA3, yeah, and that mounts. So now I'm just going to go ahead and create all of these again, and these should all just work. Okay, and now if I say ZFS list, I'm looking forward to Snowfall Lib, but I'm a bit skeptical about it being something atop of something else, should I care. So I recommend starting with flakes without using any helpers, because you'll very quickly discover that you will want some tools to make your life a little easier working with your flake. You're going to end up writing them yourself, and you'll realize, oh, these are actually more general problems, and there's a lot more things that I need, and instead of investing all the time to do that, you can reuse something like Flake Utils, or stepping up from that if you want some additional features, Flake Utils Plus. And then from there, you'll probably, like, if you've gotten to the point of using Flake Utils Plus, then you're probably working with like larger flakes, and you probably want to keep things organized without having to wire it all together yourself. And that's exactly what Snowfall Lib does, is it solves the problem of, oh, I need to like import all this in here so that I can put it on my packages output, and I need to grab all my packages outputs and put them in an overlay so I can access them in my system. It does all of that for you. And so I recommend starting fresh with like nothing, because you'll discover the pain points that are the reason that these libraries exist. Okay. So now I should be able to run this. And we should have everything working, supposedly. The A3. Oh, sorry, mount. Cool, so all those things are mounted just like we did before the first time. I'm going to turn on snapshotting. Let's do sudo OS generate config. And actually, you know what, instead of playing games here, I'm just going to try and get this working. We can come back in a moment and see if it was just our config or if there's something horribly wrong. I'm going to do Ruby. All right, so we'll let this go. And I'm gonna grab some water. I'll come back and answer any questions that you folks have while this is installing. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. So this one is going to take a little bit longer than the first install just because there's more things in this configuration. I have more packages and set up. So do you think NixOS itself will eventually define a standard for Flakes, file structure / naming? I think this is a weird situation for newcomers because of the new commands transition. File structure / naming, I guess, what do you mean for that? Do you mean something kind of what Snowfall Lib solves of like where to put stuff in the project folders? Because I don't think that Nix will prescribe that. I think the only thing that Nix is going to prescribe is the flake.nix and flake.lock files. And I think that's a good thing because you don't want you want it to be very easy to add Nix support to projects. You want to be able to add a flake into a project without having to then add a directory and then another directory and some extra Nix files, and it grows very quickly. And so Snowfall Lib does use that file system base, but there are trade-offs there, right? It can be more awkward. I mean, Snowfall Lib does support like specifying what directory to use, but I don't think that Nix will do that, and I don't think it should either. I don't think it should be prescriptive in that way. It might be useful to have suggestions in things like documentation of saying, hey, here's a useful way to lay out your configuration, because it makes it easier to work with and stay organized. But I don't think that it will ever like define a standard in that way. Gosh, this is just the meme of like quick 20-minute stream. Here we go, in and out, and who boy. It's definitely expecting things to go a little bit easier, a little bit smoother, I think, than this. But that's what I get for not doing a trial run, right? Always rehearse. But I did not this time. So I suppose worst case, we end up getting in a weird state with this machine where it just doesn't work, and I get to go figure that out off stream. But hopefully this will work because I just had it running this configuration. So the only thing that could have gone wrong is, well, setting up the file system again, I suppose. Although I did muck with the BIOS. Yeah. shout out to all the people here in stream that are still sticking around. I'm just thinking about the people watching the VOD later who are like able to just skip through this part. They'll never know. Do you not have that feeling that any other distro is just inferior to NixOS? At the current moment, I couldn't move away to anything else really. Um, Inferior is a very strong word, but part of the problem is NixOS is leaps and bounds ahead of any system I've worked with in terms of maintenance. Ensuring that my system is always recoverable is huge, right? And not just on a file system level. I could go with snapshots and hope and pray that that works. But being able to blow away my entire machine and install again with my config that I have in a Git repository and know that I'm going to have my exact environment set up with all my programs and like all of my preferences is amazing. I can't for the life of me imagine going back from that. So NixOS is here to stay as far as I'm concerned. I just can't be bothered to install all my dot files or anything else, which always leads me back to NixOS. Yeah, so I used to manage, I have an old dot files repo, and I used to manage all that, and it was tedious, but there are some tools that can make it less tedious. There's always issues, right? When you're not working with Nix, you run into version conflicts with things, it becomes a pain to grab the stuff that worked a week ago, because now it doesn't. I always, what I'm missing by not, see, I always wonder what I'm missing by not using things like Snowfall. I think my setup is so rudimentary but complete that I have not run into the pain points you mentioned. So it really starts to become okay. So I think there's different phases to this. When you start, you don't need anything, right? When you have the only thing you care about is like one output, you don't need anything. You can write your config, write a single file, you're good. As you start adding more stuff, you might break your config out into multiple files and just use imports, right, as is part of the module system, and that works fine when you're managing the one system. As you continue to grow and you add more systems, now you want to share configuration between them, but you might not want the exact same configuration. You might want differences between them, and you want to be configurable. And so now you're talking, okay, well now I'm going to use modules. So instead of just importing a configuration that like always gets turned on, now you're importing a module that specifies options and dynamically enables a config. Okay, well now you need to include all those options in all of your machines. And so you're going to have to either manage a giant list of every single module, like some projects do, like Nix Packages does this, Home Manager does this, or you could use a tool or write your own function even to pick up all of these modules. And so it's as you grow and start adding things, you start encountering these bigger problems of like, okay, well now that I have a lot of things, I have to wire them together. And so really, I want to drive home that that's the thing that Snowfall solves, is the wiring part of, oh, I need my modules to be used in my systems. Done. And when you start adding packages, if you package your own thing, well, if you do this manually, you have to put the package on your Flake output, then you have to create an overlay, put the overlay on your Flake output, then you want to include that outputted overlay in your system configuration, right? And Snowfall does all that for you. So it's like stacking on and on and on, as well as like if you want to custom library functions, you have to manage that yourself. So as you grow, you encounter more of these pain points, which for me, most of them revolve around this wiring, connecting things together. I'm currently setting up Qtile on NixOS, and I wonder if trying to Nixify the config is counter to how Qtile is meant to be used. For context, Qtile is configured purely in Python. I think it depends. I think that the module for Qtile, I forget what it's called in the NixOS module, because the name did change. But there may be, I'm thinking of a different one. Oh no, I'm thinking of LXDE, the name changed. Yeah, I would look at the module option, because if the module options specify a settings thing, that might be useful, but if it's configured entirely in Python, I would configure it entirely in Python. And you can specify those files in Nix. You can say, hey, here's my Python file. I'm just pointing to that. Another stream idea beyond my previous one mentioned, I would love to see a standard CFG moved over to Snowfall. A standard config moved over to Snowfall. Like, yeah, that would be a great one too. I think Flake utils and Snowfall aren't tools you want to use or look out after at first, but are tools that help when some complexity appears. Currently a newcomer, haven't found the need to... Exactly. And most importantly, you should... Oh my god, really? Oh, are you serious right now? Ugh. It's just one of these days where nothing works. Really? Why would this even happen? That doesn't make any sense. Okay. As I was mentioning, like, it's really important to understand stuff first. I don't think you can just jump into like a NixOS system and slap together a bunch of libraries and go, I hope it works. Instead, you really should be intentional with these things, and I think the folks in chat are thinking the same thing. Of you want to solve the problems that you have, right, and not create more or solve problems you don't have. And so while you're just starting out, you don't need much, right? Which is why I was showing you how to install NixOS with just the configuration.nix stuff. You don't need much at all, unless apparently you're running on this specific machine, which I had installed NixOS previously on and hadn't had an issue. However, as you continue to do stuff, then you start solving the problems yourself and realizing that like they're more general. Snowfall Lib was really just born out of my configuration of I was solving all these problems and realized, oh, you know, I'm getting really tired of having to manage all of these things manually. I would love it if there was just a function to do it for me. And so then I wrote a function for that. And then that just kind of continued of solving these problems, and I ended up with my own library as a part of my Flake and thought, well, other people might find this useful. And so I broke it out into its own separate thing. Okay, I will say spoiler here for the stream. If this does fail again, I am going to call it for tonight. If this succeeds, we'll take a look at well, some more things on the system. But if it doesn't finish installing or if it doesn't boot, we're just gonna skip this, and we'll have to come back another time. Sometimes I just want an opinionated POV coming in new until I figure out why. So that's the thing. I think the opinionated point of view when you're starting should just be Flake. Like, here's how you start with the Flake. And that's, in a previous stream, we looked at how to do that, of how to create a Flake and how to add your own outputs. And I think that's what you should do for NixOS. I think you should make a Flake, and I think you should then add your configuration as an output, and that's it. I think that's the starting point. Especially with Flakes having the utility of templates is really useful. Being able to just say, I want to start a new NixOS system. I don't know how to do it. Okay, run this command. It'll give you a Flake template. And then here you go, right? You have everything you need. You have a configuration. If you wanted to do that with Snowfall Lib, there's a template for that, but there's also templates that are a part of like the NixOS organization. Let me see if I can find what the name is. Part of the trouble is, of course, like, you're gonna run into some problems depending on what you're doing, right? Whether that's that wiring or you need some different things. Yeah, NixOS templates, you can use these without specifying the path, I believe. And I think there's one for... Oh, is there not one for NixOS? There isn't. Wow, okay. I lied. Sorry. I used to configure my old systems pre-NixOS via Ansible. This is so much nicer. Yes, not only is it like in some ways easier to work with, but like you have at the very least some better, more actionable errors, more utility, and it's reproducible. Whereas with Ansible, you just hope and pray. Imports is the way I'm managing it. Yeah. And like that's fine up to a point, right? If you don't need things to be like, if you're okay with managing all of those manually, then it's fine. But it might just make for more work in the long run. What template do you use for dev shells for quickly setting up a dev env for Haskell, let's say? Let's see, what template do you use for dev shells? That's a good question. So when I make a Flake, admittedly, I always just pull for Snowfall Lib. So if I were going to make a new thing, let's say, stream temp. So I might just do like a Nix Flake init. Template is snowfall.org/templates, and we're going to use I think it's just shell or dev shell. Dev. What is it? Normally I use the picker here. Oh, whoops. Package system. Oh, I don't have one for a shell. I think that I need to do that. Normally what I'll end up doing is either package or lib, but I also added this empty one. So I just grab that, which gives me everything here. And then I'll go ahead and add like, well, I want shells, my default shell, default.nix, and then in here you can do all of your stuff. I did a split on imports to get the specifics and then have a common one. I guess I did hit this, but did not realize it. So, well, that's the thing is you're still managing that like list of modules. That's the part that you're going to need to update every single time, which can get tedious, right? Having to say like, oh, I need to import my GNOME module. I need to import this. I need to import this. And when you go add a new module, it would be really nice to not have to explicitly add it to the import section to be able to use those options, but instead to just, you put your file in there and then now you can use those options. And that's what Snowfall does. So if you're fine still with managing all those things manually, with like managing, you have that imports. Let's see. So if you're like fine with in here having a whole bunch of these of like modules, GNOME, and so on and so forth, and having to update these every time you add a new module, that's fine. I find it much easier instead to, well, just work with Snowfall Lib, which picks up everything in this modules directory and automatically imports them. Hello, Pink Creeper. So we are currently waiting for this to install. We had some weird stuff happening trying to install the old-fashioned way. So I fell back to using my Flake. I just realized my ha 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 comment is out of context. I was reacting to something on stream at the time. Yeah, no, I saw that. I thought so. I think it was like me talking about how the installation is nice and easy unless it's this specific machine. Yeah, I noticed there was no shell template. Also, you do not seem to use dev shells on your config, so I was a bit confused. Yeah, so any dev shells are in specific projects for me. I don't need a dev shell on my NixOS configurations Flake because I don't need a shell to work with my NixOS configurations. Instead, any projects that I have will have their own Flake that has any important things. So, for example, if I go to work, no-op, for example, let's set a Flake. Is this not it? Oh, right, it got renamed. There we go. It's copying the Flake. Great. We'll let that wrap up and then I'll open NeoVim. But this is exactly why, is when I go to work on a specific project, the thing I care about is the shell for the project, and so that belongs there. Any like dev shell stuff I keep where it's relevant in my system configuration, and it's not needed. So instead, here I have a project, and so I have a dev shell that in fact is not defined in Snowfall because I didn't want to add. This was a while ago before Snowfall supported selecting the root directory for Snowfall config. And so I just added it in here. These days, you could make like a Nix directory and point Snowfall at it. So that's typically what I do. And you can, of course, just do this without Snowfall Lib. The only reason I used it is to support multiple systems without having to write them all out, or do like a gen adders, basically. Makes it a little bit easier. Gosh, this is definitely taking its time. We're coming up, I think, on the end of the build, but we'll see. Thanks for your content. I appreciate it very much. I'm glad it's helpful. I hope that I can do some more of this in the future. I definitely had a lot going on that I was so ready to do more of these. I did two of these streams and was like, okay, sweet. So next time we're going to do NixOS install. And then life happened, and months later, here I am. So hopefully I can make some more. I'm glad that they're helpful, though. I would definitely love if this were able to finish sometime tonight. I expected the stream to, not spend this long on trying to install. But hey, sometimes it happens. Do you know how making an ISO out of a system works? Yeah, actually, I can show you that. So what's the best way to display this? I think, actually, so here's what I'm going to do. I am going to I want okay, that works. So I forgot that I linked those. So Nix packages, I don't know why I'm doing this. I have it cloned. Has a module for taking a configuration for a system and building an ISO out of it. So you have to remember that like a NixOS system is a build artifact. It's a package effectively, right? So you give it configuration that is a bunch of packages, and the output is a directory full of files and other directories. And so there is a module for, let's see if I can find it. Here we go. So there is a module. I think this is it. Let's see. Hopefully I find it. Let's see. Somewhere in here, what we're basically going to find is it does a build to produce the ISO. And the way that it does that is just taking the output artifacts and shoving them into, well, a file system. Here we go. So it takes, and so this is a module that is in Nix packages. So when you do your configuration, you can include this module, and then you get a config dot, and I forget the exact specifier, but it's like ISO image at some point. And that is going to be the resulting package that is produced from these. There it is, system.build.iso image. So this is actually it right here. And if I go to this file, we'll see this is the thing that does that build that I was talking about. So it makes a package. And the thing that runs there we are, is this. So you'll see it's actually going to produce an ISO given some input files. So just taking all those files and shoving them into a file system. It's pretty cool. And so the way that you can do that in a Flake, or actually taking a step back, the way that you can do that in here is by saying importing that specific module. And so you'll want to import from Nix packages. You can reference the import in a Flake, or in the module here, you can actually use modules path. And then you want to point at that specific module. I'm actually going to refer to NixOS generators, which does has like functions that basically do this for you. Let me double check here. If you just wanted to produce an ISO, yeah, okay, so it is installer /cd dvd ISO image.nix. So it's actually the exact one that we were looking at here. And so all you need to do is include that, and there you go. Now, instead of building, let me go over here. Instead of building your system with like NixOS rebuild, what you'll want to do is say nix build and point at your NixOS configurations, your host name, and then you'll end up getting on there this, right, that system.build.iso image. So I could say .config.system.build.iso image. In fact, I have in Snowfall some helpers for this. Snowfall conversion stream, please. Yeah. So there's some helpers for this in Snowfall that you can specify things that are intended to be used with these specific modules, and they'll be placed as other outputs on your Flake. So if I Flake show, you'll see there's some extra stuff here. Okay, I have quite a few things, but there's namely like VirtualBox or SDAR64 or, let's see, ISO configurations or install ISO configurations, things like that, which are the same as NixOS configurations. In fact, it's the exact same result. The only difference, is that it's pointing to that ISO image property or attribute. So if I say like build ISO configurations, and I have a few of these. So that is the actual like config.system.build.iso image. And that's a little helper from Snowfall Lib. And it works best paired with Flake, which lets you just say build ISO. And then you can even select which one, or use a named one. There you go. So again, Snowfall Lib just doing the wiring pretty much. If you did want to use Snowfall Lib, the way that you can do that is by just specifying a system for it. So if you want an ISO, say x86-64 ISO. Ta-da! And then all you do is create a configuration like normal. This is the exact same as well, what you would do for any other system. It's pretty cool. You can also, instead of having to do things manually, you can reach for NixOS generators, if that's something you want to do. It's a part of the Nix community on GitHub, and that basically just handles, instead of calling NixOS system and making your system and then getting the system.config.system.build.iso image and all that, it provides you just a nice little function that you can call and takes care of it. Oh man, a Flake per project. Another thing I need to learn. Would love to see a sample or a stream. Yeah, I'm realizing I need to do a lot more of these. Yeah, Flake per project. Think of, Dustin, I think you're familiar with like Docker stuff or containers. think of Nix Flakes more as a Docker file that is way more useful, right? Anytime you would add a Docker file to a project for a dev shell, instead add a flake, right? Not only can that flake be used for a dev shell, but you can also use it to build the project, right? And provide a package. So lots and lots of utility there. I definitely recommend adding some flakes to your stuff. Okay, let's see. Hey, here we are. Okay, hopefully this works this time. I'm going to remember to unmount everything. Unmount. zpool export. rpool. Okay, and sudo swap off. We're good. There's nothing else being used. Okay. Now I'm going to shut down the system. And I'm going to go over to this computer, unplug the USB, and turn it back on. And if it doesn't work, I'm going to bed. I'll be right back. I have a bad feeling. Well, so much for a let's install NixOS stream. I guess it's just not going to work today. I don't know why though. This is definitely a little concerning because it should be booting on that system. I don't know why it's not. It seems like it's getting stuck on importing the zpool, but I don't think I'm doing anything different. Let's see here. Yeah, all right. I don't know what the deal is. It's all quite confusing. Well, I think this is where we call it and say there is now something wrong with this machine, and I get to hook it up to a proper monitor and try and debug it later. So thank you everybody for tagging along on this unfortunately failed quest to install NixOS, but hopefully you did learn something along the way. And next time we'll try and do this again. I will test it first, of course. Change the stream name to nothing from Nix. That's pretty good. Yeah, so hopefully next time we can actually get this working. And lesson learned, always do a trial run because yikes. Well, thanks for watching, everybody. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day wherever you are, and I will catch you later.